Today I would like to talk mainly about the race problem, since I'll have to rush right out and go to New York to talk about Vietnam tomorrow, and I've been talking about it a great deal this week and weeks before that. But I'd like to use as a subject from which to speak this afternoon the other America. And I use this subject because there are literally two Americas.
In 1967, as the civil rights movement entered a new and turbulent chapter, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. delivered a speech that cut deeper than most Americans were ready to hear. The other America was not just about dreams, because it was about reality. It is a reality of two nations, one bathed in opportunity, the other shackled by poverty, racism, and neglect. This wasn't the Dr. King of sanitized textbooks or sound bites. This man confronted the uncomfortable truth of economic injustice and systemic inequality. In this video, we revisit the other America, not just to hear his words, but to understand their enduring power and why they still echo so loudly today.
One America is beautiful for a situation. And in a sense, this America is overflowing with the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies, and culture and education for their minds, and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. In this America, millions of people experience every day the opportunity of having life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in all of their dimensions. And in this America, millions of young people grow up in the sunlight of opportunity. But tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And this other America has a daily ugliness about it that constantly transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. In this America, millions of work-starved men walk the streets daily in search for jobs that do not exist. In this America, millions of people find themselves living in rat-infested, vermin-filled slums. In this America, people are poor by the millions, and they find themselves perishing on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. In a sense, the greatest tragedy of this other America is what it does to little children. Little children in this other America are forced to grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. And as we look at this other America, we see it as an arena of blasted hopes and shattered dreams. Many people of various backgrounds live in this other America. Some are Mexican Americans, some are Puerto Ricans, some are Indians, some happen to be from other groups. Millions of them are Appalachian whites. Probably the largest group in this other America, in proportion to its size in the population, is the American Negro. The American Negro finds himself living in a triple ghetto, a ghetto of race, a ghetto of poverty, a ghetto, is to deal with this problem, of the two Americas. We are seeking to make America one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Now let me say that the struggle for civil rights, or the struggle to make these two Americas one America, is much more difficult today than it was 5 or 10 years ago. For about a decade or maybe 12 years, we struggled all across the South in glorious struggles to get rid of legal, overt segregation and all of the humiliation that surrounded that system of segregation. In a sense, this was a struggle for decency. We could not go to a lunch counter in so many instances and get a hamburger or a cup of coffee. We could not make use of public accommodations. Public transportation was segregated, and often we had to sit in the back, and within transportation within cities, we often had to stand over empty seats because sections were reserved for whites only. We did not have the right to vote in so many areas of the South. And the struggle was to deal with these problems. Now, certainly they were difficult problems. They were humiliating conditions. And by the thousands, we protested these conditions. We made it clear that it was ultimately more honorable to accept jail cell experiences than to accept segregation and humiliation. By the thousands, students and adults decided to sit in at segregated lunch counters to protest conditions there. And when they were sitting at those lunch counters, they were in reality standing up for the best in the American dream and seeking to take the whole nation back to those great wells of democracy which were dug deep by the founding fathers in the formulation of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Many things were gained as a result of these years of struggle.
Dr. King masterfully contrasts two Americas, not as abstract ideas but as lived realities. One is a land of abundance, opportunity, and dignity. The other is a land of suffering, neglect, and silent despair. As King describes it, the first America enjoys the milk of prosperity and the honey of opportunity. This poetic language evokes not just material comfort, but a kind of moral promise fulfilled, a society where people are not just surviving but thriving. In this America, young people are raised in the sunlight of opportunity, suggesting warmth and growth, a generational trajectory of hope. But then, his tone shifts. Tragically and unfortunately, there is another America. And here, Dr. King begins to strip away the illusion of national unity. He describes a country where economic apartheid and racial isolation are not anomalies. They are defining features, where men are work-starved and forced to wander streets searching for jobs that simply don't exist, where children grow up with clouds of inferiority forming every day in their little mental skies. This line, in particular, captures the psychological violence of poverty and racism, a trauma that begins in childhood and calcifies over time. And King is careful to emphasize that this second America is not just a black America. Yes, the American Negro, he says, lives in a triple ghetto of race, of poverty, and of geography. But he includes Puerto Ricans, Mexican Americans, Native peoples, and white Appalachians in his portrait. It's a broad coalition of the excluded, united not by race, but by deprivation. This framing was radical for its time, and it still challenges us today. King wasn't simply advocating for civil rights in the legal sense. He was exposing structural inequality baked deep into American capitalism and policy. His vision of unifying these two Americas was not just about ending segregation, but also about economic transformation, systemic repair, and a new moral contract. What he's saying here is that the dream of America, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness is not dead, but it is selectively distributed. And unless that changes, the nation cannot call itself truly free or united.
In the Negro community, that is a major, tragic, and staggering depression that we face in our everyday lives. Now, the other thing that we've got to come to see now that many of us didn't see too well during the last 10 years, and that is that racism is still alive in American society and much more widespread than we realize. And we must see racism for what it is. It is a myth of the superior and the inferior race. It is the false and tragic notion that one particular group, one particular race is responsible for all of the progress, all of the insights, and the total flow of history. And the theory that another group or another race is totally depraved, innately impure, and innately inferior. And in the final analysis, racism is evil because its ultimate logic is genocide. Hitler was a sick and tragic man who carried racism to its logical conclusion. And he ended up leading a nation to the point of killing about 6 million Jews. And this is the tragedy of racism because its ultimate logic is genocide. If one says that I am not good enough to live next door to him, if one says that I am not good enough to eat at a lunch counter, or to have a good, decent job, or to go to school with him merely because of my race, he is saying consciously or unconsciously that I do not deserve to exist. To use a philosophical analogy here, racism is not based on some empirical generalization. It is based rather on an ontological affirmation. It is not the assertion that certain people are behind culturally or otherwise because of environmental conditions. It is the affirmation that the very being of a people is inferior. And this is the great tragedy of it. Now, I say that however unpleasant it is, we must honestly see and admit that racism is still deeply rooted all over America. It's still deeply rooted in the North, and it's still deeply rooted in the South. Now, this leads me to say something about another discussion that we hear a great deal, and that is the so-called white backlash. And I would like to honestly say to you that the white backlash is merely a new name for an old phenomenon. It's not something that just came into being because shouts of black power, or because Negroes engaged in riots in Watts, for instance. The fact is that the state of California voted a fair housing bill out of existence before anybody shouted black power, or before anybody rioted in Watts. It may well be that shouts of black power and riots in Watts and the Harlems and the other areas are the consequences of the white backlash rather than the cause of them. What it is necessary to see is that there has never been a single solid, monistic, determined commitment on the part of the vast majority of white Americans. The whole question of civil rights and on the whole question of racial equality. This is something that truth impels all men of goodwill to admit. It is said on the Statue of Liberty that America is the home of exiles. But it doesn't take us long to realize that America has been the home of its white exiles from Europe. But it has not evinced the same kind of maternal care and concern for its black exiles from Africa. And it is no wonder that in one of his sorrow songs, a Negro could sing out, "Sometimes I feel like a motherless child." What great estrangement, what great sense of rejection caused the people to emerge with such a metaphor as they looked over their lives. What I'm trying to get across is that our nation has constantly taken a positive step forward on the question of racial justice and racial equality. But over and over again, at the same time, it made certain backward steps. And this has been the persistence of the so-called white backlash. In 1863, the Negro was freed from the bondage of physical slavery. But at the same time, the nation refused to give him land to make that freedom meaningful. And at that same period, America was giving millions of acres of land in the West and the Midwest, which meant that America was willing to undergird its white peasants from Europe with an economic floor that would make it possible to grow and develop. And refused to give that economic floor to its black peasants, so to speak. And this is why Frederick Douglass could say that emancipation for the Negro was freedom to hunger, freedom to the winds and rains of heaven, freedom without roofs to cover their heads. He went on to say that it was freedom without bread to eat, freedom without land to cultivate.
In this powerful stretch of the other America, Dr. King focuses directly on a truth many still struggle to confront. Racism in America is not a relic of the past. It is alive, well, and more deeply rooted than most admit. He doesn't just call racism wrong, he calls it evil, and then goes further. Its ultimate logic is genocide. That's not an exaggeration, it's moral clarity. King draws a direct line from the myth of racial superiority to history's most chilling chapter, Hitler's regime and the Holocaust. In doing so, he warns us that racism, when left unchecked, does not just exclude, it ultimately destroys. However, Dr. King's brilliance lies in how he frames racism not merely as a prejudice or even as a system, but as an ontological affirmation, a belief about the very being of people. He says racism is not rooted in data or science, but in an unprovable, dangerous assumption that some human beings are less human than others. This is what makes racism so insidious. It's not just about where someone can sit, live, or work. It's a denial of one's very right to exist in full. When someone says you are not good enough to share space, be educated, or be free, they say, in effect, you do not matter. And when a nation accepts that premise, in policy or culture, genocide is not just possible, it becomes inevitable. King also demolishes the myth of the white backlash, being a reaction to black anger or militancy. Long before black power and uprisings in Watts or Harlem, the resistance to racial justice was already entrenched. He points to the 1964 California vote to repeal fair housing legislation, a backlash that came before any riot, before any cry of black power. The point is clear. White resistance to equality is not caused by black action. It precedes it. This is the heart of King's indictment. Blaming unrest on black anger is not enough without recognizing that this anger is often a response to broken promises and enduring injustice. When the country took steps forward, like the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, it refused to follow through with economic justice, like granting land or resources. Thus, progress is often met with regression. Every step forward is countered by a quiet step back. King concludes this section with a piercing metaphor. America has long welcomed its white exiles from Europe with open arms, but there has been no such welcome for the black exiles from Africa. No maternal care, no safety, no belonging, only estrangement. Sometimes I feel like a motherless child. That spiritual, birthed from the pain of slavery, becomes the soul cry of a people still waiting to be embraced by the nation they helped build.
And I submit this afternoon that we can end poverty in the United States. Our nation has the resources to do it. The national gross product of America will rise to the astounding figure of some $7 this year. We have the resources. The question is whether the nation has the will. And I submit that if we can spend $5 billion a year to fight an ill-considered war in Vietnam and $20 billion to put a man on the moon, our nation can spend billions of dollars on their own 2 feet right here on earth. Let me say another thing that's more in the realm of the spirit, I guess. That is, if we are to go on in the days ahead and make true brotherhood a reality, it is necessary for us to realize more than ever before that the destinies of the Negro and the white man are tied together. Now, there's still a lot of people who don't realize this. The races still don't realize this. But it is a fact now that Negroes and whites are tied together. And we need each other. The Negro needs the white man to save him from his fear. The white man needs the Negro to save him from his guilt. We are tied together in so many ways: our language, our music, our cultural patterns, our material prosperity, and even our food are an amalgam of black and white. And so there can be no separate black path to power and fulfillment that does not intersect white roots. And there can be no separate white path to power and fulfillment short of social disaster. It does not recognize the need of sharing that power with black aspirations for freedom and justice. We must come to see now that integration is not merely a romantic or aesthetic something where you merely add color to a still predominantly white power structure. Integration must be seen also on political terms where there is shared power, and where black men and white men share power together to build a new and a great nation. In a real sense, we're all caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. John Donne placed it years ago in graphic terms: no man is an island entire of itself. Every man is a piece of the continent, a part of the main. And he goes on toward the end to say, any man's death diminishes me because I'm involved in mankind. Therefore never sin to know for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for thee. And so we all in the same situation. The salvation of the Negro will mean the salvation of the white man, and the destruction, the life, and of the ongoing progress of the Negro will be the destruction of the ongoing progress of the nation. Now let me say finally that we have difficult days ahead, but I haven't despaired. Somehow I maintain hope in spite of hope, and I've talked about the difficulties and how hard the problems will be as we tackle them. But I want to close by saying this afternoon that I still have faith in the future. And I still believe that these problems can be solved. And so I will not join anyone who will say that we still can't develop a coalition of conscience. I realize and understand the discontent and the agony and the disappointment and even the bitterness of those who feel that whites in America cannot be trusted. And I would be the first to say that there are all too many who are still guided by the racist ethos. But I am still convinced that there are still many white persons of goodwill, and I'm happy to say that I see them every day in the student generation, who cherish democratic principles and justice above principle, and who will stick with the cause of justice and the cause of civil rights and the cause of peace throughout the days ahead. And so I refuse to despair. I think we're going to achieve our freedom, because however much America strays away from the ideals of justice, the goal of America is freedom. Abused and scorned though we may be, our destiny is tied up in the destiny of America. Before the Pilgrim Fathers landed at Plymouth, we were here. Before Jefferson etched across the pages of history the majestic words of the Declaration of Independence, we were here. Before the beautiful words of the Star-Spangled Banner were written, we were here. And for more than 2 centuries, our forebears labored here without wages. They made cotton king. They built the homes of their masters in the midst of the most humiliating and oppressive conditions. And yet out of a bottomless vitality, they continued to grow and develop. And I say that if the inexpressible cruelties of slavery couldn't stop us, the opposition that we now face, including the so-called white backlash, will surely fail. We're going to win our freedom, because both the sacred head of our nation and the eternal will of the Almighty God are embodied in our echoing demands. And so I can still sing, we shall overcome. We shall overcome, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. We shall overcome because Carlyle is right. No lie can live forever. We shall overcome because William Cullen Bryant is right. Truth crushed earth will rise again. We shall overcome because James Russell Lowell is right. Truth forever on the scaffold, wrong forever on the throne. Yet that scaffold sways the future. With faith, we will be able to hew out of the mounting of despair a stone of hope. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. With this faith, we will be able to speed up the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and live together as brothers and sisters all over this great nation. That will be a great day. That will be a great tomorrow. In the word, sure to speak symbolically, that will be the day when the morning stars will sing together and the sons of God will shout for joy. Thank you.
In these closing words, Dr. King shifts from analysis to vision, from diagnosis to declaration. He reminds us that America's greatness is not in its military might or technological achievements, but in its moral promise, a promise that remains unfulfilled so long as poverty persists, racism endures, and inequality deepens. He argues that if we can spend billions to send a man to the moon, we can invest in lifting people up right here on Earth. King's appeal is both spiritual and practical. He speaks of mutual salvation, recognizing that black and white futures are inextricably linked. The Negro needs the white man to save him from his fear. The white man needs the Negro to save him from his guilt. That's not rhetoric, it's reality. In a world that still fractures along racial lines, King insists that survival, justice, and progress can only come through shared power, shared responsibility, and shared humanity. He doesn't downplay the hardship ahead. He acknowledges the bitterness, backlash, and struggle, but refuses to surrender hope. He says his faith is rooted not only in the arc of the moral universe, but in the resilience of the people who have always endured. From slavery to segregation, from exclusion to empowerment, we were here. King ends not with despair, but with determination. We shall overcome, not because it's easy, not because it's inevitable, but because truth, justice, and brotherhood still have a fighting chance. So, the challenge remains. Can we become the America he saw on the horizon today? That question is ours to answer. If you found this video meaningful, please take a moment to support the channel by liking, subscribing, and sharing with someone who needs to hear this. What does the other America look like today? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Stay thoughtful, stay bold, and keep pushing for the better tomorrow King believed in.